This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruiters Recruitment podcast. And what a lovely sound to introduce our new guest to you with the sound of laughter about my pint of tea that I'm going to have when I finish recording this. I'm absolutely thrilled to be welcoming a guest all the way from Minneapolis in the USA today. This is Steven Rotherberg, and I would like to welcome you to our channel today. Steven, how are you?
I am doing really well. Thank you for having me, Leisha.
You're very welcome indeed. So those who are not yet familiar with you, although everybody on LinkedIn will be clicking on your profile right now, what do you do and what does your company do?
So I am the founder and chief visionary officer of College Recruiter. It's a job search site. We believe that every student and recent graduate deserves a great career. So our customers are primarily Fortune 1000 companies, government agencies, and other employers that hire at scale, dozens, hundreds a year.
Okay.
When you're talking about the recruitment of college and university students and recent grads, that's the norm. The vast majority of them are employed by large organizations, not small.
Okay, that's great. Excellent. And you're also a podcast host too?
Yeah, so I am the co-host of the Inside Job Boards and Recruitment Marketplaces podcast with Peter Zollman of the AIM Group. And I'm the sole host of the High Volume Hiring podcast.
Fantastic.
So as I think you would not argue, this is pretty fun and pretty good for business.
It is indeed. It's great fun. And I just think it's the best way to learn. I learn so much from it, having guests on like yourself, where I'm having conversations with individuals and they probably never would have met. And it means that our community can drop in and listen for 20 minutes and learn something. That's the whole aim of it. How does it feel being sat on the other side of the podcast desk though today, Steven?
Oh, I love it. And I did a whole bunch of guest appearances, I think you could call it, on podcasts, and before I was hosting any, and I found it to be the same way. It's very informative. I'm going to learn from you today. Hopefully there'll be one or two things that you might learn from me. And it's a really great way of reaching a really highly targeted audience. It's kind of like speaking at a conference, but without the airline ticket, without the hotel, and without the boiled chicken lunch at the conference.
No, and with fluffy slippers on. That's just me, I think.
Well, I usually don't wear fluffy surf slippers to conferences, but it's possible when I'm doing something like this.
Could be a new thing. You say you've just been to London, so maybe you didn't pick up on that memo. Well, thank you very much for your introduction. And look, anyone that knows me knows that I'm passionate about helping young people transfer themselves from the education system into employment, however that looks, whether that's through apprenticeships, internships, graduate schemes, going out into the market and setting up on their own as entrepreneurs. I am passionate because I am a mum to two teenage girls. And I used to be that young person, and I always felt that there were very limited options. So I think any business like yours, where you're elevating, enhancing, and basically creating opportunities for young people, is just, these are our future. This is our future talent pool. So thank you so much for what you do. To sort of open up, I guess, let's contextualize. As we record this at the back end of 2022, any young person that's coming out of an education, whether that is a degree or college or high school, they will have had probably the hardest 2 years since probably the Second World War in terms of, global mobilization. COVID pretty much killed opportunities. So in your experience, what challenges do you think graduates and young people have faced in terms of getting into employment? What's it been like for them?
Yeah, when COVID really hit Europe and North America, kind of starting basically late February, I don't think we really adapted to it or really got our minds around it until March 2020. By that time, almost every employer that was going to hire an intern for the summer or a new graduate to start upon graduation had already done so. And so that first summer wasn't so much about a loss of job opportunities for the mostly Gen Z candidates, or Z as you would say, but what it was more about was adaptation. Employers had to get laptops and other equipment and try to figure out how to manage people remotely. So there was a tremendous amount of turmoil. There were a tremendous number of large employers who radically changed their onboarding and how they were training and mentoring that class. By the next summer, 2021, most young adults in industrialized countries and virtually everybody in developing countries had not yet been vaccinated. It's kind of hard to remember, but the summer of 2021 was sort of a tipping point where people who were going to get vaccinated, and I've been on the first day I could every single time.
Yeah.
But people who were going to get vaccinated were starting to get vaccinated, but there were plenty that were still being forced to wait. And so even then, that summer, that second summer of COVID was an adaptation summer. This past summer was kind of back to normal. There were lots of hybrid opportunities. There were lots of fully remote opportunities. There were a small number of employers that could have allowed people to work remotely, but did not. That's a management issue. I don't know if you want to go there or not. But I think the biggest impact on these young adults is a real lack of proper management and mentorship. I think that managers generally are terrible at managing people working remotely. And that's why there's such a push to have them go back to the office. People talk about, we need these young adults in the office so that we can properly manage them and train them and mentor them. You don't need that unless you're not good at doing that remotely. And if your company isn't, if you as a manager aren't, and you can't get your skill level up, then I do think at this point it's better to bring back to the office. That's the lesser of the two evils. But I see loads of companies out there that have adapted and have done a remarkably awesome job. And you might have hybrid where people are coming in 1 or 2 days a week, getting that in person, getting that mentorship, getting that training. And the number of Gen Z/Z candidates who are going into occupations where they are required to be in person, frontline workers, that type of thing, that we've kind of forgotten about those people. The conversations are mostly around hybrid and remote. And we kind of forget about those frontline workers who can't be.
No,
and that's certainly
they have to be there. They have to be there in person. I think that if I think of it in context to my sector, obviously I recruit for the recruitment industry, and there's always a narrative around, bringing trainees through, whether that's through graduate schemes, whether that's through internship, whether that's through actually school leavers. That's definitely a huge shift, I think, for the next 12 months for a lot of people. And I think that the general consensus is that for someone at an entry level, so a young person, needs to learn through osmosis, that they can watch and learn. But I actually, whilst I think there is an argument for that, what you said there really rings true, that if you haven't got processes, if you haven't got structure and infrastructure and a training program, a learning culture that allows somebody to do it remotely, you've just wasted 2 years. You've wasted the last 2 years as a business. So I think that's really important, what you've just said. There's a podcast that I listen to over here. I don't know if you listen to podcasts, but there's one called Eat, Sleep, Repeat. And it's Bruce Daisley. He was actually on my show a few weeks ago. He's the ex-vice president for Twitter and YouTube. He's based over here in the UK. And he'd interviewed the CEO of Slack. And Slack have been doing all this data. They've been capturing all the data of their clients of what because it's to predict what's happening in workplace culture. That's the whole notion of this podcast. And if a word of warning to your community and mine, if you are not capable of creating a hybrid facility for your employees, including Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the next one's coming out of school soon, you will not survive the next 20 years. You just won't. That is what their expectation is, hybrid. So I'm really pleased you said that. Thank you so much for contextualizing it. So what, in your experience, obviously your relationships with your Fortune 1000 companies and the employers who are employing on a grand scale, actually, to those listening who are running smaller to medium-sized enterprises, a lot of our audience are leaders of owner-managed businesses. Actually, we can learn a lot. We can plagiarize a lot from your companies. So what are they doing? What's best practice in your clients, in your employers who are engaging, recruiting, training, and then retaining the new talent coming through? What do you see as best practice?
Yeah, the vast majority of employers who have hired at scale, high volume hiring, hundreds, thousands a year, the way that they approached the recruitment of students and recent graduates of colleges and universities globally pretty much looks the same almost everywhere, is pretty much the same as they did in 1952. It involves flying recruiters and hiring managers around whatever country or market they're in to interview on campus, to go through career services, maybe attend some career fairs, virtually all on campus. So the entire recruitment model was structured around the school year. Starts in September, ends in May. There's this period in September and October where on-campus recruiting for people who are going to be graduating the next spring is very heavy. Offers would go out October, November. You'd get acceptances November, December. And then those students in in the US, we call them seniors, in other countries, fourth years, et cetera. But the graduates, those who are about to graduate, they could then kind of kick back for the next 4, 5, 6 months and just more or less maintain their grades and enjoy. And that's not so bad. The reality is the vast majority of students never were hired that way. It was about 30% were hired in the fall, and that's pretty consistent country to country with some exceptions. Most students who were about to graduate didn't really get around to start looking until they were either about to graduate or who had just graduated.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a misconception that on-campus recruiting was the way to find a job. It certainly is if you want to work for PwC or Deloitte or Ernst & Young or one of the big accounting and consulting companies, because that's where they recruited, and the sexiest, highest paying jobs, that's where they went. But most were not hired into those jobs. What really changed with COVID is that those employers were not allowed to go on campus. And even if they were allowed to go on campus, very few recruiters and hiring managers were anxious to jump into an airplane, go to a hotel, get into a rental car, go on campus, come home and expose their whole family to COVID. It just wasn't at the top of their list, right? No. Shockingly. So they adapted, and they discovered in 2021 and 2022 that there is this thing called the internet. Lo and behold, they can hire a 21-year-old on the internet, just like they can hire a 31-year-old or a 41-year-old or a 51-year-old. They are on Indeed, they are on LinkedIn, they are on College Recruiter, they're on all of these other sites, actually to a larger degree than their older siblings, their parents, their grandparents, whatever. Of course, it's like they're younger, they're going to be on the internet more, and yet these organizations didn't recruit them that way.
Wow.
You want to know why? It's about all the goodies. So if you were a recruiter or a hiring manager in 2019 and you were involved in your company's college or university hiring program, you got to spend the better part of a month and a half flying around, racking up a lot of points, staying in some swanky hotels, going to some fantastic dinners, and meeting with basically a lot of bright, energetic, upbeat people. Not such a bad thing. I can understand why they didn't want to give that up. But a lot of the recruiting that was on campus, physically on campus, was forced to migrate off campus. And from what I'm hearing, the CFOs and the controllers in those companies now are really reluctant to restore those travel budgets because they've seen that their companies have hired far faster, far less expensively, and a far more diverse cohort than they did before.
That's the key word, isn't it? The diverse cohort as well, which, that's without a shadow of a doubt, that's how you tap into these new talent pools, by being diverse through it. So I love the way that you contextualize that and sort of chronologically took us through the journey of a hiring company over the last 2 years. So that, and so the way that they're talking, it's through employer value proposition, presumably as well on social media, as well as actually hooking people in on their ATS system. I presume it's talking about the whole marketing strategy as well.
Yeah, the engagement is relatively easy if you have a very prominent consumer brand.
Yeah.
So, even if it's like a client that you work with and they have, half a dozen restaurants in Birmingham, right? People in Birmingham are going to know them.
Yep.
But if they operate a, concrete mixing company, 20 miles outside of Leeds, it's really unlikely that very many university students are going to know what the heck they do.
Yeah,
and
true.
So those organizations need to try harder. They need to get, really work on the engagement. If people don't know your brand, if your brand is neutral or negative, then you have to get them to want to work for you. It's much more than just, is the job title right? Is the salary right? They need to believe in your mission.
I agree with you totally. And that really resonates with what previous guests have, who come from marketing backgrounds, that's what they talk about all the time. It's a holistic approach to ensuring that our listener, a lot of whom are leaders, you're putting all the right pillars in place to make sure that you're not just attracting competitors and existing talent, but future talent pools as well. So you've obviously talked about what's happened in the global landscape during COVID, in terms of travel, in terms of, the limitations. So as we head into 2023, what do you think the opportunity looks like for those listening who are, thinking about mobilizing themselves, moving from, say, Minnesota, coming over to the UK, or moving over from Canada to, Germany? What do you, in your experience, in what you're seeing in your clients, what's the situation? What's the reality?
There certainly is a substantial group of people who are still very fearful of traveling. And I think that once people who have traveled once or twice, they kind of get past that, and they realize that the world, it's never going back to the way it was in 2019, but it is a lot closer to that than it was in 2020. And people are traveling, schools are open, international opportunities are available, the semester abroad programs, the work abroad programs, they're all back up and running. One of the nice things right now for those who are thinking about, as my wife and I call it, working remotely, we've been able to do that a couple of times this year, is that it's pretty easy to find places and find setups, whether it's an Airbnb, whether it's a school, whether it's an employer, who will allow and enable that. So a lot of employees can go to their managers and say, hey, I've got a demonstrated ability to work successfully remotely. I've shown that over the last 2.5 years. I'm located in Minneapolis, and I would like to go and work for the month of January in Austin, Texas, because it's a heck of a lot nicer in Austin in January than it is in Minneapolis. And so are you okay if I do that? And a lot of managers are like, go for it. Enjoy. Just get your work done, because they're managing by outcomes. They trust that employee to get their work done. Where they get their work done is a different. It's kind of like, who cares?
It's immaterial where they're based. Oh, I'm so pleased you made that point, Stephen. I mean, trust, hire on trust, measure outcomes, can work from anywhere. Love that.
Yeah, it's not about the sweat on your brow. It's about, at the end of the day, Leisha, I asked you to do, A, B, and C, and you got them all done as we discussed. You were accountable for getting those done. You got those done. Here's a big pat on the back, and maybe why don't you come in late tomorrow as a little bit of a reward because you knocked it out of the park. Whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll come in late tomorrow. I'll start at 5 a.m. and not 4 a.m. as I did today. By the way, for anybody who is watching on YouTube, I don't know what's happened, but it's like this Armageddon style cloud has come over the window that I'm sat in front of, and I'm not in a position to turn the lights on. So I hope you can still see me. There's like these white, you can just see my white earphones. So I do apologize. I think most people listen, but it's quite amusing. I think I'm disappearing into the shadows. So I do apologize. But look, this has been really insightful, and you are really echoing what the whole channel's about. And, you know, you clearly are very, you know, you're an expert in your space and you're passionate about what you do. And I think that this message, it doesn't matter whether you're listening to us in, you know, Hong Kong, whether you're listening to us in Tel Aviv, or you're listening to this in Leeds, you know, and we love Leeds, by the way. So as a final, you know, I guess piece of advice, really, a lot of our community are actually recruiters. You know, these are recruiters that a lot of whom have possibly just been on a similar journey to the one you've described. We get a lot of new recruiters who are trying to, you know, learn and develop themselves by listening to this podcast, which is wonderful, and others too. So what advice would you give to recruiters who are also then going to try and engage with, you know, younger people in their communities? So what would you say to that, you know, tech recruiter who's going to go out and try and find the next generation of software developers, for example?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this, because it's a question that I don't think comes up enough. The best approach that I've heard for this, especially for a small organization where the recruiter might not have a ton of marketing support and they're kind of on their own, is literally go to the employees in your organization who kind of look the most like those that you want to recruit. And I don't mean look in terms of, does she have blonde hair, or is she, you know, is she pretty? Is she not? Is he tall? Is he? No, I'm talking about if you are going out there and you're trying to hire, say, 3 software developers, like right out of university, talk to the software developers that you already have on staff, especially those who have mostly recently graduated. Maybe they graduated a year ago, 4 years ago, but probably not as much the guy who graduated 40 years ago. Ask them simple question. When you get up in the morning, why do you come to work? Why do you choose to come to work, whether that's down the hall in your spare bedroom or across town in an office? What causes you to come to work instead of call in sick? That is going to be your employee value proposition. And that's what you need to communicate to your candidates. If you can do that, you're going to be authentic and it's going to resonate. And you might not like what you have to hear. It might be, you know what, you pay me way too much money. I can't make that much money someplace else. You're horrible to work with. I detest my work, but I love the money. And so that's why I come. Well, you know what? Now you know you need to pay your candidates a lot.
Yeah, you do. I was going to say that is absolute gold. What incredible advice. And that doesn't matter whether you're hiring in lawyers. It doesn't matter if you're hiring in junior doctors. That is absolute gold advice. We want authenticity, but it gives you that feedback that you wouldn't have got otherwise. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. And I really wish you all the very best. Have you got any exciting plans for travel yourself in 2023? Because I know you've said you've been to Amsterdam, you've been to London recently.
Yeah, my wife and I just spent 5 weeks in Europe. We had a conference in Amsterdam, a conference in London, and then had an Airbnb in Brighton. And the weather was shockingly very nice. So that was a big bonus. We ate more than our fair share of fish and chips and had a few pints along the way. One of our kids, our oldest, lives in Mexico. And we are thinking in January, when it's really awful to be here in Minneapolis, we're thinking about going down to Mexico for 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks. So
I think at minimum of 4 weeks. I think that sounds incredible.
Yeah, just pray for me. Somehow I think we're going to have to struggle through it. But, our business is, I think, a lot like yours. We can do it. Anywhere there's a good Wi-Fi connection, we're good.
I was going to say, and hopefully a little bit of light, but, get those enchiladas in, a few tequilas, have a wonderful time. Thank you so much for joining us on the Recruitment Podcast.
Thank you for the opportunity, Alicia. It's been a pleasure.